Today is May 20, 2019, and the person being interviewed is William J. Wiley. And Mr. Wiley, what is your birth date?
3/6/1943.
And the current city and state you reside?
West Richland, Washington.
Okay. And the people who are in the interview right now are Jason Leiden, Brandon Hinchman, Fernando Garcia, and William Wiley. And the name of our school is Butler High School. Mr. Wiley, were you drafted or did you enlist?
I enlisted.
Why did you join?
Well, basically, you had a draft back at that time, so you had to take, sometime in the first 20 or so years of your life, you had an obligation to take care of something, and or you could take your chances and have it interrupt whatever you were doing at some point. In my case, I had been working summers as a mechanic in a marina, and I had two engines that I ended up having to get the factory rep to take a look at, and they both turned out to be electrical. So I started asking questions about where you could learn about electrical, and a cousin of mine suggested that the Navy had some pretty good schools on it. So I decided I would take care of my obligation and learn something about electricity at the same time.
Okay.
I took their various tests and was guaranteed a school that I wanted, so I went ahead and enlisted, and that's how I got in the Navy.
Okay. What was your job or assignment?
Well, eventually, after I finished the various schools, I was an aviation electronics technician, and I also had another specialty in communications, so I went into after finishing a series of schools, was to be in a flight crew for a Navy anti-submarine patrol plane.
Okay.
Big Island, Washington, but I was only there 3 days before we went to Alaska for 6 months.
Okay. Which wars did you serve in?
Well, I was one of the first crews that, part of the first 3 crews that went to Vietnam in 1964. That was before the ground troops got there. And went to Da Nang, which had an airfield that the Air Force had just built, and then pretty much moved away from. We landed there, and our first assignment was we had 3 airplanes, and we were assigned to track all the various boats offshore that were along the Vietnam coast. So we would, with 3 planes, we were expected to, we didn't have any ground crews for maintenance, so the flight crews handled all our maintenance. We handled all our maintenance, and with 3 airplanes, we had to have a plane on station 24 hours a day in the air. So we would take off. First plane would take off. 12 hours later, the next plane would take off and meet the other plane in the air over the ocean, visually relieve them, and then they would fly back. So that would be a 13-hour mission. yeah, then we would fix the plane, whatever needed to be taken care of for the next flight, and then see if we could find a place to get some sleep for what the trick was that you had to, the plane that you relieved did its 13-hour flight, 12 of them on station, flying up and down the coast and recording all the various boats that were out there off the Vietnamese shore. And then as I said, when they got visually relieved, they'd go back and they'd, again, get that plane ready for its next flight. After a couple of weeks of that, that's a pretty heavy schedule to keep airplanes in the air, that 3 airplanes in the air for that amount of time. And you don't get a whole lot of sleep with, by the time you get the plane ready for the next flight. And then you don't have any, we didn't have any assigned place to sleep or get food. There was no chow hall on the base. It was defended by South Vietnamese at that point, so we'd have to find some food, go into town, do whatever you had to do. We did have one truck assigned to the 3 airplanes, and we were still in our bright orange flight suits, so that's what you had when you went into town. We had one .38 pistol with 6 rounds of ammunition for each airplane, so that was what we had for area protection. When you went into town, you would see all kinds of people driving by in trucks with every kind of gun in the world. But those were the assignments, so that's what we took care of. After a couple of weeks, one of the planes lost the engine. One of the propeller engines, our planes had 2 jets and 2 propeller engines, piston engines. So while we tried to figure out where we could get a replacement for the engine, we still had to have a plane on station 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that meant things got very busy then. They decided to, that since we didn't have any place to sleep, that they would bring a seaplane tender into the outer harbor and said we could sleep on that. Of course, the problem with that was it was in the outer harbor and we didn't have a boat. So we would have to wait for them to send the boat in each time to pick up the crew, and that was going in for food and rest. So they wouldn't allow the boat to come in before the first light in the morning. So whatever time the crew got finished fixing their plane and got a ride into town, we'd have to sit there on the pier in the orange flight suits until the boat got there, maybe half an hour to an hour after sunrise. And it was a very busy town. That was the name.
Okay.
But we were still in our orange flight suits because we didn't have the normal clothes you would normally have, because just before we were sent down there, our barracks burned down in Japan, and so everybody had 1 pair of dungarees and 1 flight suit. 1 pair of dungarees and 1 flight suit get pretty ripe after you're down in the tropics for a couple of weeks, and you can't get a shower. But once we finally got on the boat, on the ship, we at least could get showers and food. So So that wasn't too bad. And after a while, we actually borrowed the Admiral's airplane. He had an amphibian. And the Admiral that was on board that ship, so he borrowed his plane and put the crew on the amphibian and get landing clearance at Da Nang before we take off from the outer harbor. And then he'd land at the airfield in Da Nang and go get your plane ready for takeoff. And that was 13 hours late, so it was a very busy period.
Okay.
And finally, after I don't know a month or sometime, I forget exactly, they brought in the Marines, so the base became a totally different thing. Then once they landed all the Marines, and they pretty much took over the base.
Okay. What branch of service did you serve in?
I was in the Navy.
Okay. What was your rank?
Aviation electronics technician, second class.
Where did you serve?
When did I serve?
Where?
Oh, well, we landed. I enlisted. I went through basic training in just outside of Memphis, Tennessee. Then I went to schools in San Diego, and then I was assigned to Whidbey Island, Washington, to a patrol squadron that deployed first for 6 months in Alaska. There you patrolled the east coast of Russia, east and the northern coast of Russia, and then after that we were assigned to Japan. There we patrolled the lower eastern coast of Russia, the coast of North Korea, and the east coast of China. And then we were assigned in '64 to go down to the Philippines and over to Japan, over to Vietnam. After that, we were sent back to Whidbey Island again. And then in 1966, I was sent back to Japan and Vietnam again. The first time in Vietnam, we were at Da Nang. The second time I was in Vietnam, I was in Saigon, flying out of the Tan Son Nhut Airport. And then I had some pretty good timing finally. That was, I had been in for 4 years. Mr. Johnson extended our enlistment for another 4 months. And then I made that second trip over to Vietnam. I got relieved March 15th, 1966. And 2 weeks later, my airplane had 160 some holes in it. Because 2 weeks after I left Saigon, we had a mortar attack that went off right under my airplane. And the only guy that got killed in our squadron was, at that time we had a ground detachment helping with maintenance, and two of my crewmen were in the plane with one of the ground support guys. When the mortars started landing, they jumped out of the plane into the ditch that the tail of the plane was parked over, and a mortar happened to land right next to them, and the guy from the ground detachment was unfortunate enough that the mortar landed next to him, so he took the full blast, and the two guys in my crew were basically not harmed, but he died.
Were
I
you
think the only other injury to our squadron was a couple other guys did get some wounds from the shrapnel from the mortar attack.
were you awarded any medals or citations?
Oh, just because I was there in '64 and '66, I'm eligible for either of the two Vietnam medals, but you can only have one of them. Didn't really make that much to me. It was yeah, we did a lot of flying over there, and as I said the first time we were there, no ground crew, so you had to scrounge parts everywhere. But other than that, a good conduct medal, that's about it.
What was the food like?
Well, as I said, when I was there, we didn't have food, so you had to go into town to find some food. We had no support. We just had to. Even when I was in Saigon, we didn't have a mess. We didn't have food. You had to when you got done with your work on the airplane and flying, you went into town and tried to get some food. They had a mistake on my orders, so when I actually got discharged back in California, they said that because somebody forgot to stamp my orders to go over there for the second time, they had the orders stamped from Whidbey Island to Japan, and Japan to the Philippines, and then orders from Japan back to the States for discharge. But the orders to the Vietnam the second time in '66, somebody didn't stamp them. But when you're flying like that, you don't personally carry your orders. So they decided they had to subtract from my pay the $8 a day they allowed for food while you're over there.
Did you make any close friendships while in the service?
Make any what?
Did you make any close relationships or friendships while you were in the Navy?
Yeah, the fellow who replaced me when I got discharged, took over the position in my crew. I ran into him 15 years later, and I was, no, I guess it was longer than that even. But anyway, the trick was that I had worked as a civilian when I got out of the Navy. I worked on a whole series of different Navy projects as a contractor, and when I finally, after I quit that and was recruited by the Department of Energy to come out here to help them with this. I'm here at the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, and when they recruited me, several years later, I ran into the guy who relieved me in Da Nang, in Saigon. He was a senior guy in the Department of Energy, and he's the one who gave me a picture of my airplane with the 160-ton holes on it. So we would communicate back and forth fairly regularly for a number of years. I also had the best pilot that I had for a number of years. The whole time that I was in, I didn't know that he was an ex-enlisted person, but after I got out, I ran into him in Washington, D.C., where I was working and on different projects. And it turns out that he had been an enlisted man and went to MIT, got his degree and went back into the Navy as an officer. And when I met him, he was a commander back in Washington, D.C. He got orders to go to take over one of the patrol squadrons back in the Philippines while I was talking with him, and the admiral he was working for in Washington, D.C. convinced him to just stay with him rather than, if he went to the Philippines, he would have been captain in another year. But he convinced him that the work he was doing in Washington was really more important. So he stayed there, and eventually he did retire as a commander. I would still run into him periodically back there. And after he died, my wife and I took care of his wife quite a bit with, she needed some operations and things, and so my wife would fly by and take care of it. But yeah, they were very good friends of ours. In fact, when my son got commissioned, he came to my son's commissioning ceremony.
Tell me about your boot camp / training experience.
About what?
Your boot camp / training experience.
The boot camp experience?
Yeah, your boot camp experience. How did you feel about it?
Well, it was I finally went in on the first week of December, and we got shipped up to the Great Lakes. And at that time, we still had the old World War II frame barracks that were pretty tired. They were in the process of building a whole new set of barracks up there for the boot camp, but where we were, it was you were either hot or you were cold. About, I think, 15%. When I was up there, about 15% of the people got either bronchitis or pneumonia. I think the coldest we saw was the week we were working in the chow hall. Every company in boot camp would do 1 week in the chow hall. And when you were in the chow hall, you wore your tropic white uniform. So when you went from the barracks to the chow hall, things got pretty cold. It was 33 below, I think, one day when I had to go over in tropical whites to work in the chow hall. And the number of guys coming in for food that had pretty serious frostbite, pretty obvious. But it was okay. They you got classes on a whole variety of things for just normal duty in the Navy, and you got physical training to try to get everybody at least up to a starting level on the, some guys were not in the best of shape. I wasn't in bad shape. I was, when I was in Butler, when I was a junior, we started the cross-country team. They hadn't had one in quite a few years. And my senior year, I was co-captain, so 6 months later, when I went in the Navy, I was in pretty good shape yet. So the boot camp wasn't a big strain at all. But some of the guys were pretty rough. And then there were people that just with the draft and the need to get the number of people they needed for, they took all the people that volunteered, and then they took what was the rest of them by using the draft. And some of the people coming in the draft were college students, and some of them were, let's just say, not the best brains And so helping them get through boot camp was not necessarily the easiest thing. But they, everybody had to serve, so you did what you could. You helped the people because eventually you might need them yourself.
What did you go on to do as a career after the war? After you served?
Well, I had before Johnson extended me, I had a job lined up with Lockheed down in Seattle in a shipyard. But since Johnson extended me, the next spring that job wasn't available, so I had to start looking for a job. And finally I had 3 offers. One was for a job for 6 months in New Jersey, going to school with RCA, and then going up to Clear, Alaska for the DEW line. Another one was with a place called Vitro Laboratories, just outside of Washington, D.C. And the third one was from McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis as an electronics quality control inspector. I had been to Fairbanks, Alaska, because some of our patrols over the northeast coast of Russia, we would take off out of Fairbanks. So I'd been there, and I knew Clear, Alaska was only about 20 miles away, so I had a pretty good idea of that one. The McDonnell Douglas in St. Louis, I didn't really know anything about St. Louis. And then I got looking at the job for RCA and realized that after 6 months I had to go to Alaska, and although you made fairly good money up there, you had a bunch of taxes, and the expenses for your wife were rather significant up in Fairbanks. So I decided to take the job with Vitro Laboratories. I was there for a couple of years. We had a lot of ex-Navy, one enlistment Navy technicians there. And I worked on putting the first digital computers on Navy ships. I was involved in a number of studies because the electronic experts had predicted that you could not send a digital signal more than 2,000 feet. And so we did a bunch of research and tests to verify that we could, in fact, send a digital signal more than 2,000 feet. And so we replaced some extremely expensive computers that were on the Navy ships that were analog computers. And unfortunately, although they worked very well, they were being analog. The gear drives and stuff in them were subject to wear. And the digital computers were less subject to the mechanical wear like that. So we did the studies. I worked on the wiring and how to convert about 20 different Navy ships to put digital computers on for the first time. From there, I went to work for a variety of companies around the Washington, D.C. area. I worked on a project at Vitro Labs. I ended up having to pick up the process for configuration management that they were responsible for on some Navy ships, but the guy who knew how to do it quit and didn't train anybody before he left, so they ended up asking me to pick it up. So I did that for a period, and in the process of figuring out without any training how to do it, I actually developed some fairly significant techniques to improve the process. Then I worked for Control Data Corporation on a variety of programs, mostly with the Fleet Ballistic Missile submarines. And I'm trying to think now. After that, I worked on an Air Force project to put the first digital computer on a B-52. Then, let's see, I went back to Vitro and did studies on configuration management for the Navy. And went through and studied, I think, 50 different configuration management systems that they were playing with, and finally showed them how to consolidate them, and so they would do things in one way and not build and then throw away and then build and throw away various configuration management systems for different parts of the life of their various ships and equipment. So I did that. Then I went to work for another company where I wrote for the Navy a couple manuals, life cycle guide for configuration management, and the life cycle guide for contract data management. Then I went out and started a company and started an engineering and management support company. We helped the Navy write the contracts and manage the contracts on almost 70 different ships and about a dozen different ship classes over the years. And I also did a job for the Army on capturing all of their records for medal awards. It turns out that they had things sitting in boxes since the Indian Wars and had no way to find anything in it and had no way to preserve it from just deteriorating from various, it was on all kinds of different material. And when you go through the boxes and look at the material in there, you find things that look like bullet holes on the decals the kids put on windshields. And that's what the Army records for awards and decorations look like. So we had to build a database to be able to search it, and we hired a bunch of college kids. They were very tight on money, so we hired a bunch of college kids for a part-time job to come in and film the records and enter the fill out the database, and converted it all to CDs, which were new at the time. So we had to get a lot of studies to verify that CDs were better than microfilm for archiving the material. So those are some of the things I've done with the engineering company. I think we're renamed 503 times. And eventually, after we got out of that and the company was sold, did a variety of other things, and then I got a call from somebody I hadn't seen in 15 years who convinced me that I needed to come out here to Hanford, here in Richland, Washington, to help them clean up their management information system for running the site. So after several months of back and forth, they convinced me to come out. And since I met my wife in Washington before I got out of the Navy, we talked about coming back to Washington State off and on, and so we finally came out here, and I think she said that she prayed a lot to come back to Washington. She learned that she has to be more specific about where in Washington. it's this side of the state. This part of the state is rather different from the part that she lived in, but we've become very happy with it. Though it's an arid area in Washington. When you get about 7 inches of rain, and there's a lot of agriculture as long as they can get water for the crops. The soil is all volcanic ash, and it's very, very good for anything in agriculture as long as you have access to a well or the river for crops. We have 3 rivers that come together within about 5 miles of where we live, so we have a good bit of water.
And one more question, Mr. Wiley. Is there anything you would like to add that we have not covered in this interview yet?
No. The way things are, from what I saw back in Washington when I was there for almost 30 years, our government is pretty screwed up. I'm embarrassed that we're leaving things in the condition that it's in. I wish more people would read the Constitution, including our news media, because they make tremendous efforts at misinforming the public about everything. And I'm kind of embarrassed that it's as bad a shape as it is. If people would go back and actually read the Constitution and try to live up to it, we'd be a lot better off. So I have apologized to my sons a couple times that I wish that we'd done a better job while I was doing things. But the current situation is, it's hard to believe that many people can be that stupid. But that's the way it is.
Thank you, Mr. Wiley, for sharing us your recollection, and have a good day.
You too.